So now we'll just talk a little bit about generally the effects of age on driving. And some of this we touched on already. But AAA is a very strong believer in the idea that age alone is not a sufficient determiner of someone's crash risk. And so we do take a pretty strong stance on saying that just because someone is over a certain age doesn't mean that they should lose their license. And we see those kind of ideas being floated, especially after those sorts of high-profile crashes that we all see in the news from time to time. Well, maybe there should be a maximum driving age. There's a minimum driving age, or there should be a maximum driving age. And we just don't think that that's fair, because when it comes to any of our, especially legislative advocacy, we're always very conscious of making sure that there is really solid science behind it, and really solid research to justify whatever measure it is we're supporting. And this is just one that there is no science to say that a 75-year-old driver is inherently more risky or less able to drive than a driver who's 55. And that's because everyone ages differently. And especially, more so at the other end of the spectrum, we hear the argument sometimes, the reverse of that argument. Well, then why do we have a minimum driving age? I know some 14-year-olds who are way more mature than some 18 or 19-year-olds, and I'm sure we all do. I probably know some 14-year-olds that are more mature than some 40-year-olds. But generally speaking, there's enough of a strong enough correlation, not just looking at actuarial tables of crashes and crash data, but just looking at brain chemistry and how does the brain develop and at which benchmarks. Yeah, there's variation, but generally speaking, on that lower end, when you're younger, it's a much more predictable progression of when your brain chemistry is going to gel and you're going to achieve those levels of understanding and processing risk and making judgments, at the same time or within the same time frames, at least the capacity for it. But on the other end, as we age older and older, it's such a wide variety. Even in terms of cognitive issues like dementia. I had a grandfather who developed dementia, in his mid to late 70s. My mother developed dementia in her early 60s. So just from that alone, doesn't make sense. Well, because she developed it at 60, maybe we should make 60. The cap. Well, if you don't develop something like that until you're in your mid 70s, why deprive you of 15 years of independent mobility like that? Especially when we know there are such negative factors, and this was another study we did, and I'm sorry I hadn't had a chance to add this one to it yet, but we've also done studies that show, what is the effect of losing one's license? As much preparation time as you can, and it can mitigate this, but we know that there are emotional and physical effects that have been documented in terms of losing your mobility and being able to stay active, make it to appointments, stay socially engaged after you lose your license. So why would we want to put people in that situation earlier than they should be or need to be? So we're very strong on that age alone is not an indicator. It's different for everyone. One of the biggest changes that we see, of course, or most of the biggest changes that we see, or we actually can't see, is what I'm trying to say. There are the things that are happening internally, the perception, your vision, and your cognitive, speed of judgment. Vision is commonly recognized as one of the earliest indicators. People who maybe never had glasses as a child or throughout their adult life, suddenly by as early as their mid-40s, begin to lose their visual perception or the field of vision begins to narrow and things like that. And that all has an impact on driving, because driving is a very visual task. Changes in our physical well-being, such as our strength and stamina, can affect driving as well. Driving is a skill, but driving is also a physical activity. Again, we don't always think of it that way because you're sitting, right? You're sitting down in a car. But we've probably all experienced that where you're on a long road trip. Maybe you've been in the car for an hour or two, and you finally pull off for a rest area, and you find you're sore. And not just from maybe being scrunched or sitting in the same position, but your neck is sore, and maybe you're feeling fatigued, and it's because driving is a physical activity. You have to be turning and checking things, even just going back and forth between the gas and the brake, especially for older folks can sometimes be more challenging, and it can be more taxing on their body. So there is a strong correlation between physical fitness and being able to safely drive. And then again, older adults tend to have the best judgment. They have the capacity to make good decisions, to think through risk and reward. What really changes, though, at least unless you're talking about specific cognitive disorders like dementia, but even for any older driver, is the speed at which you're able to make those decisions can decrease, and that can have consequences behind the wheel as well. So the human brain begins to slow slightly, actually around the age 30. We still tend to make good decisions, but it sometimes takes us longer to get there. Talking more about the visual search area, while the default search area should be well in front of the vehicle, we also want to be searching near the ground to help us detect important information and support safe driving. So, your normal field of vision is straight ahead. You also need to be looking at the ground, at the sides. What we tend to find in older drivers or as people age is that their field of vision begins to drop. Their natural gaze begins to drop to the point where, if it goes on long enough, they may get to the point where they're really just looking at what's right in front of them, what's right after the hood of the car, when we really need to be searching much further ahead, and especially if you have delayed reaction time, you definitely need to be searching much further ahead, and that's one of the areas in which senior drivers can run into trouble. Again, they're not necessarily even at the point where maybe they're making bad decisions, or maybe their speed of judgment is okay, but you can't make judgments based on information that you haven't perceived yet. So if you're looking down instead of looking ahead, and you're not seeing the kid chasing after the bouncing ball into the street until you're right up on him, even though you may mentally make the decision or recognize, I need to stop right now, maybe you're physically limited to the point where you're not able to execute that command as quickly anymore. So it's vitally important to get that information as soon as you can by keeping your field of vision up. Another thing that affects older drivers visually is light. And you hear that's one of the most common things that we hear older drivers say, is that they don't feel comfortable driving at night. I'm fine driving during the day, I just don't like driving at night. I see a lot of people nodding. You've probably heard that before. And that's because as we age, the amount of light that's necessary for us to focus and actually detect and make out things in front of us increases. So again, this is kind of an illustration of what, at 20 years old, this is what you would be able to see. With the same illumination, this is what your eyes would see at 40, at 60, and then at 80. And again, those are really rough estimates. Some people may lose those abilities sooner than others, but generally speaking, by the time you get to 80, you need significantly more light to be able to see things. And then part of that also is about road infrastructure. So if you're driving at night, not being able to see those signs becomes an issue as well. So we do work with the states and local municipalities, encouraging them to, when they are replacing street signs, as they do road construction or routine maintenance, to upgrade to reflective signs and make sure that all of their signs are actively reflective. They're not just painted white, which is naturally reflective, but they actually have reflectors in them so that you can see them better at night. All right. Any questions about the effects of aging on driving? No? Yeah. So, well, actually, one thing I'll just mention. We talked about people who say, I'm fine during the day, but I don't feel comfortable driving at night anymore. And that's actually a really positive sign when someone says that, especially if they actually follow through on it, and not just saying, well, I don't feel comfortable, but I still do it. But we do really look to seniors to use their good judgment to self-select and sort of modify the circumstances under which they drive in order to improve their own safety. And you see seniors doing this all the time. I don't like going out during the day or during certain days or times of the day because I know traffic is heavier. They try to find lower traffic volume. They try to find routes that are easier. Maybe they don't feel comfortable driving on the highway because they know that the higher speeds means that they need to have sharper reaction times, and they just don't feel like they're capable of doing that anymore, so they stick to side streets. Or they don't feel comfortable making left-hand turns, especially without the assistance of a protected arrow. So they plan their route out to make sure they're only making left-hand turns at protected arrows and things like that. And those are really good. Those are signs of a responsible driver recognizing their own limitations and keeping not only themselves safe, but the people they're sharing the road with safe. But it's also an illustration of the fact that this doesn't have to be, jumping off the cliff. Well, one day I have my keys and the next day I don't. You can begin to gradually work your way out of driving by limiting the times you drive and begin exploring alternative transportation options while you still do have that backup. You could say, hey, I'm going to start taking the bus to my doctor's office just so that I learn that route and I at least know how to get there. So if I ever had to give up my keys or when I have to give up my keys, I'll still at least feel comfortable knowing how to get there. Well, maybe you're running late one morning and maybe taking the bus does take a little longer. You're still able to say, well, I'm not going to do the bus thing today because I'm running late. I'll just drive, and kind of gradually working yourself into that. So we have a number of resources available, and I have some samples of some of them with me. But all of them are available on our senior driving website, which I'll talk more about the website itself in a minute. But we have Driver 65 Plus. That's actually a whole series of different brochures on specific topics relating to driving. There's mature operator courses. AARP has a lot of programs like this. AAA has our own version. You'll probably see theirs more often. They have a larger network of volunteers that help them put on their courses than we do. STP Exchange. I should know what that stands for, but I don't remember that one. It's been a while since I've done this presentation. I don't remember what that one stands for. Straight Talk for Mature Drivers. That's another brochure series. Physical brochures that we used to have. Older Wiser Driver. That and how to help an older driver. Those are more resources for caregivers or folks who are, in your situation. You're not the older driver yourself, but you work with them and you're trying to help them and plan for them. Our biggest thing, though, is our senior driving website. And when we first launched this, the first generation of this, so to speak, was about 10 years ago. And it was kind of frustrating because on the one hand, we had so much great information on there. But we knew that the people who would benefit from that information the most were the least likely to visit the website because they just weren't computer people. They didn't have internet access as much. They weren't visiting it. It just wasn't their thing. But as that's changed, this has become a really critical resource for this second generation or younger generation of seniors, so to speak, the baby boomers that are retiring right now, who may not want to admit that they would benefit from this site, but definitely would. There's a lot of great information on there, and it's really categorized. There's a section on there, all of our resources about evaluating your driving ability, both ways you can evaluate your own, ways that you can evaluate a loved one's that you're concerned about, and then also recommendations for where can you go to get professional evaluations. There's a tab on there, Understanding Mind and Body Changes, really takes a deep dive on some of the stuff we touched about earlier. How exactly does aging affect driving? There's resources on there for improving your driving skills. So you've evaluated, you've learned about how aging affects you, and now you recognize, hey, I've got some issues I need to address if I want to be able to keep my license. And our goal really is to help people stay mobile, as independently mobile as long as possible. So again, we don't advocate for the idea of, okay, you're going to one day just stop driving, or, oh, you've got some problems, some areas of concern, let's just go ahead and take your keys now. Maybe there's some remediation that can be done. Maybe there are some adaptive devices, changes to driving behavior, changes to your vehicle itself that you can make that can allow you to continue driving longer. This covers a lot of that, focusing on the driving skills aspect of it, maintaining mobility and independence. A lot of that talks about planning for life after driving. How do you maintain mobility? How do you maintain your independence after you no longer have your driver's license anymore? All the tools and resources, and then resources for family and friends on there. And there's videos, there's quizzes, there's just a lot of great stuff on there. I would encourage everyone to check it out. I brought a bunch of these cards that have the web address on there, and even the nifty QR thing that you could just scan on your smartphone, and it'll take you right to the mobile version of the site. And if you want to take extra of those cards to share with communities or agencies or organizations that you work with, you could feel free to take whatever I have here with me today, but if I don't have enough, just shoot me an email and we'll get some out to you. We also have a really cool thing, and this is, you can access a PDF of this from the website, but this is called Smart Features. And this is a really cool thing that we do every year. We actually update it every year, specific to vehicles, but we look at what are the features in vehicles that are most helpful to senior drivers. And not just like the bells and whistles, but things like having a thicker steering wheel that's easier for someone with arthritis to grab. Larger, more intuitive knobs and controls that are easier. Things like, most cars now have got, like the auto start and stop. We noticed that's an issue. Seniors who maybe have wrist issues, especially with the older models where your car key was more like your house key, and actually making that turn was difficult. That's one of the reasons that they actually started making the ends of the keys thicker. One, so that they can put the buttons in there, but also it made it easier for people to turn the key. And now all you have to do is press a button with a lot of these newer vehicles as well. But we look at what are these general features that are helpful for drivers and that can serve as a guide for them if they are going out to buy a new vehicle. What kind of features should they look for, should they ask about? But then we also update it every year with all of the new model year vehicles that are being released that year, and actually identify which ones have which features. So if you say, hey, I know that thicker steering wheel, the knobs, these are the things that would benefit me most, you can search which vehicles coming out that year have those features. CarFit is a program that we launched over 10 years ago now with AARP and the American Occupational Therapy Association. And what this is designed to do is give drivers a checkup on how well their vehicle meets their needs. So even when you have all these features, whatever features your vehicle has, the next step is knowing how to utilize those features, knowing how to adjust your vehicles. And sometimes it can be as low tech as knowing the distance that you should be sitting away from your steering wheel so that the airbag doesn't, break your nose when it goes off. Knowing, not so much anymore, when we very first started doing this program, and we would be set up in a parking lot and seniors coming through, and we'd be going through the checklist with them, and we notice, they've got their seatbelt, put behind them. Well, why don't you wear your shoulder belt? Well, it's uncomfortable. It rides up on my face or on my neck. Well, did you know that you can go on the column and adjust it? Oh, I didn't know that. A lot of them didn't know that because that's a relatively new little, very low-tech feature, but something that helps improve safety dramatically by making the seatbelt more comfortable to wear. More likely is that they're going to wear it. So we go through a 12-point checklist. It takes about 20 minutes. We traditionally do these events in partnership with an occupational therapist. who can then, if we notice there are certain items on the checklist that are like red flagged, where if someone does have an issue with that item, we say, make sure you stop by, talk to the occupational therapist. They can give you some more advanced information, possibly set up a consultation for you to come back and learn, go a little deeper on these issues. We also look at things like the mirror, properly adjusting their mirrors to reduce blind spots, things like that. The handy bars, just to help them physically get in and out of the car. The next big thing that's kind of a hot topic, but an important topic, the issue of medications and driving. So we hear a lot about the issue of drug-impaired driving, and typically we talk about that in the context of marijuana or opioids or other illicit drugs. But any medication could possibly impair you, and even if you're taking it as prescribed for legitimate purposes, it could still be impairing. Something as simple as Sudafed, making you drowsy behind the wheel. That's an impairment. Being drowsy is a form of impairment. You see, the standard classic, don't operate heavy machinery when on these medications. Well, we don't think of a vehicle as heavy machinery, but it really is. And we say, whether you think of your Buick as a heavy machine, treat it that way. And if your medication recommends you not drive a vehicle. And we think it's really important for seniors. This is an important conversation for them to have with their healthcare providers when it comes to their medications that they're being prescribed. What are the possible impact or effects that it may have on their driving? And if they notice that it's having an effect, what are some ways that they can adjust it? Can they adjust the timing of the day that they take it? Can they switch from one type of medication to another? Maybe there are multiple medications that pretty much do the same thing, but there's just different chemical compounds. Maybe one compound affects them and the other doesn't. Things that you could play around with. Just like any other side effect, like nausea or anything else, the side effects related to driving, working with your healthcare provider to adjust them. We know that 8 out of 10 drivers over the age of 65 are taking some sort of medication on a regular basis. That's not to say that all of them are impaired by those medications, but it just highlights how important that issue of medications really is. And then obviously medication use increases with age. Almost 70% of seniors over 55 use one or more than one potentially driver-impairing prescription. So again, it's not to say that they are being impaired by it, but they're taking medication that is known to possibly cause impairment. So the effects are the same that you would have from any other drug, including alcohol. Impacting your alertness, your level, being awake, difficulty maintaining control of the vehicle, difficulty concentrating on the road, and then changes in demeanor and just general attitude changes can have an impact on your driving. We did a survey, and I forget what year this number is coming from. This may be an older number, but troubling nonetheless. Almost 50% of seniors have never spoken to their healthcare provider about the possible effects of their medications on their driving. And we hope that that's coming down, and we developed a tool based on this to help them. It's called Roadwide RX. It's not a super unique tool, at least anymore. A lot of other pharmacies have this, but what it does is allow you to go in, because we know a lot of seniors are getting their prescription medications from multiple service providers. They have different specialists that they see. They have different prescriptions from each of them. And unless you're using a pharmacy that actually will cross-check everything for you, sometimes it's possible that one doctor doesn't know what the other is doing. And that's growing less prevalent now that there's so much communication with MyChart and different systems like that. Electronic medical records are a huge win for traffic safety in that sense. But this is still a useful tool because it also will help you check over-the-counter medications against your prescriptions. And so you go in there, you enter in all the different prescriptions you're taking in there, and then it'll pop up and tell you not just specifically whether those individual medications have any impact, potential driving impact, but if there's any combinations or cross effects by the combination of medications. And it just gives you a little printout of what the possible impacts might be. And then also talks about what are some ways to bring it up to your doctor, or questions you might want to ask your doctor, suggestions you might want to go through with your doctor. Things like, again, changing the time that you're taking the medication, or finding a different compound of the same strand that might not be as impacting to you. Flipping ahead here. So, sure.
So you had mentioned about keyless cars, right? The auto start cars. And there are some individuals that have actually died from carbon monoxide because of that.
Right.
So I'm just wondering about seniors with any type of hearing loss or short attention spans. Or are there any statistics on individuals like that? And then carbon monoxide deaths by the cause of that.
Not that I'm aware of, but that's definitely an issue to look at, or to keep in mind. I think when you're talking about hearing impaired, again, not being able to necessarily know if the car accidentally turns on somehow and it's in the garage and you don't hear it running, and then you go out into the garage to get something, and it can succumb to those effects. Exactly. Yeah, I don't know if there's ever been any studies specifically on that, or if there's any statistics that would break that out. But it's definitely something I can raise with our foundation folks to include in their next round of possible projects. Thank you. So one tool that we actually did kind of borrow this from the teen driving world, and so this is one that may not work for everyone. When it comes to teen driving, we advocate what are called family or parent-teen driving agreements, where parents and teens kind of sit down and talk about what are the rules of the road, not just from the perspective what are the state's rules, but what are the house rules? When are you allowed to use the car? What do you have to do to maintain your driving privileges? Because parents ultimately are the arbiters of that for teens. But this looks at, with seniors, if you have an older senior that's a family member or someone that you care for, and you're concerned about them, this could be a useful tool, again, in terms of guiding that conversation and identifying benchmarks, so that, again, you're not reflecting and looking back and saying, like, well, I've noticed you've been swerving more, or I noticed you got into 3 fender benders in the last 6 months, or things like that, and then putting them on the defensive. Talking about those things in advance and saying, like, okay, well, you're safe to drive right now, and that's good. We hope that lasts. But what are kind of the things that you think would indicate to you that might not be the case anymore? And getting them to actually set the terms in advance of when it may not be safe for them to drive. And getting them to say, hey, if I have more than 3 fender benders in 6 months, then yeah, that probably you might want to try and take my keys away. Getting them to buy into that in advance is a helpful tool. Although by its nature, it also could be something that could be off-putting, to older parents dealing, if their adult child came and said, let's do a driving agreement. I think as we get more and more into the age where the senior or the older parents we're talking about did parent-teen agreements with their adult children when they were teenagers, that may be a little more awkward, because it's like, wait a minute, we did this with you when you were a teenager. Another resource that's on here is locating local transportation programs. Again, getting the idea of the seniors who say, well, if I gave up my license, how would I get to my doctor's appointments? How would I get to my Elks Club meetings, or whatever else they're into, their church functions? This helps them look. And Wisconsin actually has a pretty good array on there, especially for a largely rural state that's very spread out. You see, obviously, a lot of dots around the Milwaukee and Madison and Green Bay area, but there's a lot of stuff out there, even in some of the more outlying areas of the state, so to speak. This is another great one, and I have samples of this one here. This is always a popular one. It's called the in case of emergency card. It's a card, you peel it off. There's a wallet-sized version of it, and then there's a size that you put in your glove box. And it just allows you to write down really basic key information. Who's your primary doctor? Do you have allergies to any medications? Things like that. Who should we contact in an emergency if you are unconscious in your vehicle, either in a crash or in any situation, and a first responder comes up on you? So that way they know. I mean, sure, they have your driver's license and they could run information, they could find your address and things like that, but the driver's license is not going to tell them who's your next of kin, who should be contacted, who should we call, if we take you to the hospital, do we need to tell them, don't give this person penicillin or something like that? It gives all of that really key information in a really handy form. First responders are trained to look for something like this. If they come up upon an unresponsive person, that's one of the things that they're trained to do is find their wallet, look through their wallet. Is there anything like this in there? If they're in their car, look in their glove box. See if there's some sort of card that has emergency contact information on it. And that's it. So if anyone has any other questions, we could use whatever time is left. Otherwise, my contact information is up there. You know how to get a hold of me. You can share that as well. If you want to get additional quantities of any of the resources that I brought samples of here today, please let us know, and we can get those shipped out to you. Any other questions? All right.
No questions. All right. Well, thank you very much,
Thank
Nick.
you.
We appreciate your time and very thorough presentation. I really enjoyed it. As someone with an older mother who has decided pretty much on her own that she isn't driving anymore, which is like awesome. Yes. So, no, this was really great information. And all this presentation is in PDF form in that live binder link online. And so that would have his contact information as well. And Linda, you have a question?
No, it's not a question.
Oh.
I just wanted to share with you when the car fit started. I was trained in that car fit. And so we looked for a place within the community that would let us do it for free there so it would be easy access for people. Turned out to be a funeral home they had for my crew. I can tell you from that experience that people weren't thrilled to be coming through a funeral home.
They did the car fit in a funeral home.
Yeah,
Oh,
that is...
that's poor form. Poor form. Yeah.
That is one of the challenges we have with that program. I mean, and we actually don't directly do that in Wisconsin anymore. I know there are some of the community colleges that have OT programs have still done that. I think AARP occasionally will do one. But it is kind of a logistically intensive program to set up. And then oftentimes you don't get a lot of participants because as much as we try to avoid any language that would invoke this, there still is the sense among some people that it's some sort of a test, and if they don't do well, we're going to take their license away and report them, or we're going to, if they're insured with us, we're going to cancel their policy or something, and that's not the idea. It's completely anonymous. The information is purely for their own information, but there's that fear.
I think we have one other question here.
I just wanted to, I'm a car fit coordinator and technician, and they do have them at small community hospitals around Wisconsin. I just looked the schedule up. But there's also for the people in the room that do vehicle assessments through IRIS and things like that, you can find the measurements in the car fit guide right online. So if you're unsure of how far somebody should be sitting from their, steering wheel, things like that, those measurements are there. So it's kind of a good resource, even though you're not like a trained facilitator or you wouldn't be able to actually take somebody through that. That information is there. It's pretty helpful. So.
Perfect. Thank you.